Usually safe, the road between Beetleton and Shaymore had become the stalking grounds of a thief. A drunk and a gambler, Saul D'Alessio had recently lost a bet that he didn't have the gold to pay. He was not necessarily a bad man, and banditry was a new low, yet it was easy money. At least until he was caught, and the punishment was exile from Kryta. Blindfolded Saul was ridden 3 days away from civilization and left in a remote forest. Alone, delirious, lost, the authorities expected him to die in the wild and never be heard of again. It came as quite a surprise then when later Saul returned to Kryta, a changed man. Where once he'd looked ill and sunken, D'Alessio was now the picture of health. Rather than the rags of a beggar, he now wore a sleeveless white robe embroidered with gold. No longer a drunk and a layabout, Saul had gained purpose. He preached of the unseen ones, a race of divine beings that supposedly saved him from death. He claimed to have been to their city, a dreamlike place of astounding architecture with towers so high they pierced the heavens. Its denizens did not touch the floor where they walked, but floated majestically about. Tall and thin, they had wing-like appendages on their backs that rippled and moved with even the smallest breeze. When they spoke, Saul said it was the most melodious sound he'd ever heard. He called them gods. Saul spread the word of his gods, and while no Krytan had ever seen them or found their city, people began to believe. At the time, Kryta was in turmoil. The king had fled the throne to save himself before the Char invasion. There was nothing left to stop the beasts. So people looked to Saul. His following grew, and before long they, the White Mantle, were the last thing left to defend Kryta from the Char. The loss of Prince Rurik was not a death sentence for the remaining Ascalonians on the Shiver Peaks. They had aid navigating the caves beyond the Frostgate, and before long the people were descending the western slopes into sunny, green Kryta. The land was well known for its hot climate and white sand beaches. Mildly tropical inland, the region was well suited to farming. There was much wealth here, though it was unevenly spread. Rulers and protectors of the land, the White Mantle, saved most for those who shared their beliefs, and for the nation's defence, erecting stone fortifications that dotted the landscape. A northerly section of Kryta was designated for the refugees to live in. This became the Ascalon settlement. Here the survivors stayed, citizens of Kryta that retained their Ascalonian culture over the generations. Divona travelled to the capital of Kryta, Lion's Arch, with her friends. The coastal town was adorned with statues of tall stone lions that looked outwards towards the sea. It traditionally housed the kings and queens in the royal palace, but that had been derelict since the flight of King Jadon and the White Mantle takeover. Since miraculously repelling the Char invasion, the group had assumed responsibility over Kryta's armies, police and government. Not everyone liked this. The Shining Blade, a group of resistance fighters, murdered and harassed other Krytans from the nearby Maguma jungle, fighting the White Mantle expansion. They were royalists and would spill blood until the throne was once again occupied, ignoring the fact that King Jadon had left the people for dead. Before the White Mantle, the protectors of Kryta were the Lion Guard. Another distinct faction, this group had lost much responsibility after the loss of their king, and was now reduced to defending just the capital. While they were allied with the Mantle, they operated outside of it, and made their own decisions. There was talk among them of the Scepter of Or. Of unknown origins, but first found in Or, the relic had disappeared some time ago. The scepter had a lost twin too, the Staff of the Mists. Gifted to the world in ancient times for protection, the weapons had fallen into the hands of the corrupt and wicked who abused them, forcing the gods to intervene. Both a powerful and influential force on Tyria. The Mantle had recently found the Scepter of Or, lifting it from a mausoleum. But there was a problem. The living dead began to attack. They swelled up from the swamps and graves, and soon Kryta was infested. Undead wanted the scepter for themselves, and little by little they came closer to stealing it. Presently they had the mantle and the staff encircled at a location near Lion's Arch. Our heroes arrived in time for the attack. Here they met Confessor Dorian, the White Mantle leader, who was there to help defend the scepter. He had taken over after the disappearance of Saul D'Alessio a year or two ago, and since had overseen the development of the White Mantle and ruling of Kryta. Together with the Confessor's aid, the heroes repelled the undead and ensured the scepter's safety. Dorian was quick to recognise their efforts. As reward, he made the Ascalonians honorary members of the White Mantle. Though they did not openly accept these unseen gods or relinquish their own beliefs, the adventurers became brothers of the Mantle in arms. Time passed, and when the summer solstice came, the heroes were invited to carry out the testing of the Chosen. At the village of Shaymore, they found Justicar Hablion, a renowned White Mantle knight. He showed them the Eye of Janthir, a magic floating eye that could judge people to discern their magical aptitude. It was said that the mantle retrieved it from a remote island to the north, whose inhabitants possessed the gift of true sight. The eye was used to find the Chosen, citizens of Kryta that would be taken to study under White Mantle Grand Masters at the Temple of the Unseen. The eye would gaze on, and its subjects would either rise to glory or fall in shame. Many excited people wished to be picked to study in secrecy like those before them, yet it was bittersweet. They would be taken from their homes, never to be seen again, and amid the animated chattering of the majority was the odd chord of sadness or concern. After the ceremony, a caravan was set up and a journey to the Temple of the Unseen to the south began. Hableon did not take a direct route though. Before long the men and women came to a remote region dangerously close to the Maguma jungle, exposed. A fatal error. The Shining Blade attacked from the trees. Hableon and the heroes were caught off guard, and the Chosen were kidnapped, dragged into the jungle, Mantle left behind. Hableon returned to Kryta for help while the others pursued the Shining Blade to save the victims, though this was a risky move. The Mantle had always struggled against the Shining Blade in the Maguma. The rebels knew how to travel through the thick foliage and lay traps, using guerrilla tactics to deadly effectiveness. They were capable of moving the trees themselves to create pathways the Mantle couldn't follow on, an ancient practice gleaned from the deceased druids whose spirits and ruins still lingered deep within the forest. Despite this, the heroes readied their weapons and pushed into the undergrowth. Enormous trees, many times larger than any found in Ascalon or Kryta, inhibited movement and formed a thick canopy above. Hostile animate plants stalked the depths, and insects loomed in every corner. The jungle was broken up by dusty, cracked red cliffs with flat, dry tops that were comparatively easier to travel on, if only the trees could be climbed to reach them. By some feat of endurance and a measure of luck, they caught their foes. The Chosen were not dead, but the Shining Blade had made a mistake. They were wrapped in cocoons, the prisoners of Maguma spiders. Quickly, the party of heroes slew the arachnids and freed their allies, before turning on the enemy. But too slow. The rebels had called for help of their own, and from the trees descended a force of Shining Blade that had the heroes encircled. Unaided and outnumbered, they surrendered. Ivinia, leader of the Shining Blade, didn't know what to do. These people were White Mantle, her sworn enemies, and yet she did not want them executed. Clearly they had tried to save the Chosen, not kill them, so perhaps they did not fully understand. Marcus, a trusted member of the Inner Council, warned Ivinia not to let them loose, but despite this she freed her captives. There was much to explain. The Blade told their story, claiming the White Mantle was liars, and they had proof of it. Nearby in the jungle was a bloodstone, a chunk of magical rock upon which the jungle foliage could not grow. Hableon had returned to Kryta for more Chosen, and supposedly, rather than bringing them to the Temple of the Unseen for training, the knight was leading them to the bloodstone. The heroes would watch and wait to see for themselves. They were running late though, and Hableon was already there when they arrived. The White Mantle stood on the stone. They had the Chosen bound and on their knees, and had set up a series of odd crystals about the edges of the platform. Suddenly, Hableon had every last Chosen, man and woman, young and old, slaughtered. Their blood flowed across the smooth surface of the bloodstone, awakening magic within it that pulsed and shone beneath its glassy rock surface. The souls of those killed rose up and, in a flash, were captured in the floating crystals. Lightning cracked around their shells, and then they were still again. At the same moment, the Shining Blade attacked. The heroes rushed their once ally and engaged him. Hableon was a formidable opponent, and long over the magically charged bloodstone they clashed. At last, it was over. The knight's corpse fell to the floor among the bodies of the innocent, and with that, the party became traitors to the Mantle. What specifically the bloodstone, the odd crystals, and the trapped souls meant, Ivinia did not know, but she explained the truth behind the White Mantle. They believed in the Flameseeker prophecies. Their gods, if they existed, were not the heavenly beings the Mantle claimed. Chosen were never taken to the Temple of the Unseen, but instead to a bloodstone, to be routinely murdered. Countless had died. The Mantle believed the Chosen were prophesied to rise up and defeat the Unseen Ones, and this was their way of ensuring that wouldn't happen. The Shining Blade, Ivinia at its head, sought to end the Mantle and their misguided beliefs. Despite propaganda, they never harmed the innocent and considered themselves on the side of the people. Important decisions were made by the Inner Council, consisting of Ivinia, Marcus, and a Krytan woman named Saidra, among others. There were no Mantle witnesses to Hableon's murder, but soon word had reached them of what happened at the Bloodstone, and Confessor Dorian, an old friend of Hableon's, enraged, ordered war on the Shining Blade. This was a significant escalation in the conflict, and the Blade were outmatched. Ivinia knew of a place to hide, inaccessible to any mantle without inside knowledge, the Henge of Denravi. It was an old abandoned temple and city of the Druids, who had since transcended their mortal forms and become spirits with nature. The Blade raced the mantle to the Henge, completed the trials of entry, and prepared their new base of operations. Soon after, Vizier Kilbron, a wizened mage from Or, approached the Blade with an offer. The Vizier wanted the Sceptre of Or, but the Mantle, who still possessed it, were keen to keep it from him. If the Shining Blade helped him retrieve it, they would gain a powerful ally. They accepted. So Saedra and Ivinia led a small party from Denravi during the night. They sailed up the Ullen River back into Kryta. Far south they made for the Temple of the Unseen. Indeed, though the Chosen were never brought here, the temple was an important location to the Mantle. It was where the Sceptre of Or had been taken. Undead had, over time, gathered in vast numbers around the fortified complex. In the dark of night the party crept, avoiding Mantle patrols, towards the temple. Here they found Dynus waiting, a Shining Blade spy who had lifted the scepter from inside but could take it no further than the temple perimeter. The plan went without a hitch, except that Marcus had not arrived when he was supposed to. Saedra was concerned by his absence, yet it was too late to turn back. Further east was Sanctum Cay, a Krytan island hosting a monastery where the Vizier awaited the scepter's arrival come morning. Deep in Kryta now, it was essential the Mantle not discover Blade leaders on the island. There was just one boat. Saedra remained on the mainland to watch for any pursuing enemies, while the others sailed across the waters. On the other side, the party split again, Ivinia tending to the boat, the only way off the island, and everyone else pushing on. And finally, there he was, Vizier Kilbron. Dressed in Orian robes, the man spoke with a distinct accent and radiated an inner strength that belied his outward appearance. It was almost unsettling. Yet he did not deceive them, and Vizier Kilbron was about to save their lives. He had much to say. Marcus was a traitor. As the Shining Blade had their spies, so did the Mantle. Marcus was leaking Blade information, and now the Mantle knew everything. Denravi had been stormed, with the hiding Blade either killed or routed. Worse, Saedra and Ivinia had just been captured at the docks. The backbone of the Shining Blade was broken. Now, White Mantle descended on the monastery for the Sceptre of Or. The boat lost, the party was trapped on Sanctum Cay with no place to run. But now, they had the Vizier. Kilbron did not plan to give up the scepter. As bearer of this ancient relic, he commanded the undead to fight by his side. He led the heroes to a disused dock on the other side of the island and began to cast a spell. From beneath the waves rose a once sunken ship to escape on. With Mantle slashing at their heels, the party escaped on it with their lives. Yet where could they go? The Shining Blade were defeated. Kryta had become a death trap. Returning to the Ascalon settlement could risk the safety of the evacuees, and what was left with Adalbern and the hateful Char. As before, Kilbron had a plan. "You are chosen," he said. The Flameseeker prophecies were written not about innocent Krytans, but the people on that boat. He instructed them to claim their birthright, to ascend and gain the gift of true sight, to make the unseen seen. Only through ascension could these heroes take the fight to the Mantle and liberate Kryta. It was time to seek the flame. Dorian, Hablion, Thomas, Gissinger, Brian, James, Rebecca, and Saul D'Alessio moved in silence through the gates of Demetra. Tonight, the Char would either be defeated, or Saul would lead his friends to their death for nothing. A last resort. A suicide mission. There was no other choice. Yes, there was the promise of the unseen ones, but no one had ever seen them, and even, maybe, Saul had begun to doubt that they would come to Kryta's aid. It was dark. The plan was to slip through Char lines and assassinate the three leaders orchestrating the assault on Kryta. As they moved north, Saul saw great fires burning, effigies made to the Titans that illuminated the surrounding fields, otherwise blanketed in darkness. Char were everywhere. But they were not caught, and before long the Mantle found themselves stood before the three unsuspecting commanders. They raised their weapons and attacked. Everything went as expected. Unready and outnumbered, the Char leaders still waged a furious battle for their lives. The noise drew attention from all around, and though the commanders were indeed slain, their entire army now marched on Saul's location, keen for revenge. Everything had gone as expected. The stranded men, weak from battle, would take as many Char with them as they could. Their sacrifice was not in vain. The Char could not recover from this. They would fall into disarray and, hopefully, Kryta would be saved. But it was time to die. Saul's unseen gods hadn't done a thing. It was the strength of men, not of false gods, that had defeated the Char. They were close now. And that is when it happened. From nowhere, before all men, suddenly something floated into existence. Not one thing, but three. Three divine, beautiful creatures. Tall and thin, they had wing-like appendages on their backs that rippled and moved with the smallest breeze. When they spoke, it was the most melodious sound the men had ever heard. Salvation. The Unseen Ones fought with the White Mantle, protected them. Hundreds of Char fell and none could hurt the intruders. Their entire force was broken, decimated by spectral agony cast upon them by the opposing gods. When all were either dead or fleeing, the Unseen Ones turned to Saul and his followers. Everyone had survived. Yet the gods did not celebrate it. Without warning or reason, as impassionately as they fought the Char, the Unseen Ones attacked their allies. Only those they deemed most faithful were spared. Many of Saul's closest friends and believers were murdered at his feet, and the true nature of the Unseen Ones was revealed. For Saul himself, the gods had reserved a special fate. Hablion, Thomas, and Dorian watched as the entities took him by the shoulders and, just as they had floated into existence, they disappeared once again, taking a struggling Saul D'Alessio with them. Hablion, Dorian, Thomas, the survivors of that night, returned to spread word of the Char defeat, but never did they reveal the sinister truth. Saul D'Alessio was said killed by the Char, and the Unseen Ones told as the saviours of Kryta. It was on this bed, made of lies and fear, that the Unseen Ones and White Mantle came to power in Kryta. Only the Flameseeker prophecies foretold their eventual defeat.